Natalie Jensen didn't see the ice until it was too late. One second, she was jogging briskly along the quiet, snow-lined sidewalk, earbuds in, breath fogging in the cold dawn air, and the next, her foot hit a slick patch and her legs flew out from under her. Whoa! Her scream echoed off the empty buildings as she slammed down hard on her back, her head narrowly missing the curb. Pain shot up her spine and her palms scraped against the frozen pavement. She blinked up at the pale pink sky, stunned and breathless. "Hey. Are you okay?" A man's voice, deep and urgent, broke through the ringing in her ears. Natalie turned her head, wincing. A pair of leather boots stopped beside her, followed by a strong hand reaching down. She blinked again, trying to focus. The man crouching next to her looked like he belonged in a magazine ad, sharp jaw, dark scruff, and eyes the color of steel just before a storm. His coat looked expensive. So did his watch. And the way he moved controlled, confident, like he was used to taking charge. I think so," she muttered, trying to sit up. "Don't move too fast," he said, pressing a steadying hand to her shoulder. "You hit pretty hard." "I'm fine, really," she insisted, even though pain radiated through her arm and hip. She hated being the center of attention, especially in front of someone who looked like he probably had assistants to tie his shoelaces. He helped her sit up anyway, his hand warm and steady. "You could have cracked your head. That sidewalk should have been salted." "I guess I should have been paying more attention," she said, trying to laugh it off. He shook his head. "You were jogging at dawn. You were being productive. The city's the one asleep." Natalie finally looked at him properly, and something weird happened in her chest, like her heart skipped, then started running faster. She didn't even know this guy, and yet she felt seen. "I'm Marcus Fairbanks," he said, offering his hand. Marcus. Of course he had a name like that. It sounded like money and power and private jets. "Natalie," she said, shaking his hand. "Thanks for stopping." He glanced down at her scraped palms. "You're bleeding," she grimaced. "It's not bad. Come on," he said, standing and offering his hand again. "Let me help you up. I've got a car right around the corner. You need to get checked out." At that, she hesitated. "I don't have insurance." He raised a brow. "Good thing I didn't ask if you did." "Are you always like this with strangers who fall in front of you?" He smiled, and it made him look younger, softer. "Only the ones with blood on their hands and fire in their eyes." Natalie let him pull her up. She expected her legs to give out, but somehow his arm stayed firm around her waist, grounding her. "You really don't have to go out of your way," she said as he led her toward a sleek black SUV parked just around the block. It gleamed like it had been detailed that morning. "I'm not," he said simply, opening the passenger door. "Get in." "I'm not getting into a stranger's car." "You're right," he said. "So let's fix that. I'm Marcus Fairbanks. I'm 32. I run a few companies, mainly real estate development and private equity. I'm not married, no kids, no criminal record. I live 2 blocks up in that penthouse." He nodded toward the tallest building in the area. "And I don't usually offer rides to anyone at 6 in the morning, but you're hurt and I'm not leaving you on the street." Natalie stared at him. "That was a lot of information," he shrugged. "You looked like you needed convincing." She hesitated, then climbed in. The car smelled like leather and something expensive she couldn't name. As soon as he slid into the driver's seat, the heated seats turned on. "You really live in that building?" she asked, glancing out the window. "Top floor," he said, pulling away from the curb. "I was heading to the gym when I saw you fall." Natalie looked down at her scraped hands. "Well, good timing, I guess." He glanced at her. "You're lucky you didn't hit your head." "Yeah," she swallowed. "Thanks, really." Marcus didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "You're the first person I've talked to today who didn't want something from me." She looked over. "What does that mean?" He gave a small laugh. "It means I usually start my mornings with lawyers or board members or investors. People who want to pitch something. You're just a person who fell." "I'm not very glamorous," she said. "I think you are." Her breath hitched. He didn't say it like a line. He said it like a fact. 10 minutes later, he pulled into the emergency clinic's covered entrance. "I'll wait," he said as she unbuckled. "You really don't have to. I want to." Something about the way he said it made her stop arguing. She went inside. When she came out almost an hour later with bandaged palms and a mild sprain in her wrist, Marcus was still there. standing by the SUV, talking to an older man in a suit. As soon as he saw her, he cut the conversation short and came over. "Everything okay? I'm all in one piece," she said, half smiling. "They said I should rest it for a few days, no jogging, you can still walk," he said. "Are you offering to be my walking partner now?" His eyes met hers. "I'm offering breakfast," she blinked. "What, you haven't eaten?" "I know a place a few blocks from here, best pancakes in the city." "Why are you doing this?" He paused. "Because something about you makes me want to." Natalie stared at him. "I'll behave," he added. "Promise." She laughed, really laughed this time, and nodded. "Okay." Pancakes? They walked to a little cafe tucked between two brownstones. It was warm inside, full of the smell of coffee and syrup. Marcus held the door open for her, then pulled out her chair at the corner booth. They talked over pancakes and eggs. Natalie told him she worked in a bookstore down on 9th Street. That she lived in a tiny walk-up with a roommate and spent her mornings running because it was the only time she ever got peace. He listened, really listened, and told her about growing up in Massachusetts, how he started buying apartment buildings in college. He didn't brag, he just shared. By the time they walked out, the sun was fully up and the snow was starting to melt in thin rivulets along the sidewalk. "I have meetings," he said reluctantly, "but I'd really like to see you again." Natalie nodded. "Okay." His eyes searched hers. "I mean it. I know." She turned to walk toward the train station, then paused and looked back. "Hey," he stopped. "I'm glad you stopped this morning," she said softly. His smile was slow. "So am I." Neither of them knew it yet, but that fall on the icy road wasn't the accident it seemed. It was the beginning of everything. 2 days later, Natalie stood in front of the bookstore's warped glass door, her wrist wrapped, her breath fogging in the late afternoon chill. The bell above the door jangled as she pushed it open, the scent of paper and coffee beans greeting her like a familiar hug. She tucked her hair behind her ear and stepped inside, ignoring the dull throb in her arm. "Should you even be working?" Camille called from behind the counter, not looking up from the register. "I'm shelving, not lifting crates." Natalie walked past her, dropping her coat on the hook near the office. "Besides, I need the hours." Camille's gaze lifted, sharp as always. "You didn't mention the guy." "The one who brought you in." Natalie paused, fingers brushing the spines of the new arrivals. "I wasn't sure what to say." "Start with why a man who probably owns a helicopter was driving you to urgent care like it was his job." Natalie gave a small laugh under her breath. "He offered." "That's all." Camille leaned her elbow on the counter. "And we had pancakes." "Pancakes," he said he knew a place. Natalie straightened a stack of poetry books, trying not to sound like she'd replayed every moment since. "That's it." Camille arched a brow. "You don't get that kind of bone structure without a trust fund. He didn't ask for your number, he already had it. He called to check in yesterday." And Natalie hesitated. "He asked if I'd have dinner with him." Camille blinked. "And I said yes. You said yes to dinner with a man who wears cufflinks before 9 a.m. I said yes to a man who waited outside a clinic for an hour and never once looked at his phone." Camille tilted her head. "I'd say be careful, but you've never been reckless with men." Natalie didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a cart of returns toward the back aisle. Her chest was buzzing with something that felt like electricity or maybe adrenaline. She hadn't been able to focus on anything since he called. That evening, she stood in front of her closet, towel still wrapped around her damp hair, staring at clothes that suddenly looked too casual or too stiff. Camille, who had come over after closing, sat cross-legged on the bed, sipping tea. "You're thinking too hard," Camille said. "He said it was a place with a view," Natalie said, flipping through hangers. "That could mean anything. Then wear the black wrap dress. It fits you like it was made for your body and doesn't try too hard. You'll look like you meant to be stunning." Natalie raised a brow. "That's your fashion advice? That and wear the earrings your sister gave you. They catch the light." 30 minutes later, Natalie stepped out onto the sidewalk and paused at the sight of a sleek car idling at the curb. A driver in a dark coat opened the back door. "Miss Jensen," she nodded, stunned silent. The interior of the car was buttery leather and polished wood. She sank into the seat, barely breathing as the city lights passed by in a blur. When the car pulled to a stop, she recognized the building instantly. It was the same tower Marcus had pointed out that morning. The driver opened her door with a polite nod. "Mr. Fairbanks is waiting for you upstairs." Inside, a woman at the front desk greeted her by name and directed her to the private elevator. The ride was silent, the numbers ticking up slowly. When the doors opened, it felt like stepping into another world. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline, and the space was cast in golden light from strategically placed sconces. A table for two stood near the window, set with white roses and flickering candles. And Marcus, he was standing there, hands in his pockets, wearing a button-down shirt open at the collar, his expression unreadable until he saw her. "You look." He took a step forward, eyes sweeping over her. "Incredible," Natalie swallowed. "So do you." He pulled out her chair, waited until she sat. A waiter appeared moments later with wine and something that smelled rich and unfamiliar. "I didn't want to go out," Marcus said as he poured her glass. "I wanted to talk without any noise." "I thought this might be better." She looked around. "You live here?" "For now, I move around a lot." "Why?" He studied her. "Because I'm always chasing something." Natalie took a sip of wine. "And what are you chasing now?" He hesitated. "Lately, I've been trying to remember why I started any of this in the first place." She raised a brow. "And then you fell in front of me and I remembered." "What does that mean?" "It means you didn't know who I was and you didn't care. You weren't trying to impress me or get anything from me. You just wanted to get up on your own." She set her glass down. "I didn't want to need help." "I know, and I think that's what I liked most." They ate slowly, the conversation weaving from childhood stories to embarrassing moments. She told him about the year her parents divorced and how books became her escape. He told her about the first building he ever bought, a disaster of a duplex with termites and a leaky roof. "You always talk like you're used to being in control," she said. "That's because I usually am, but you're not tonight." "No," he said, voice low. "Tonight I'm trying not to mess this up." She blinked. "Why would you?" "Because you're the first thing in a long time that doesn't feel like a calculation." After dinner, he walked her to the elevator. The silence between them was thick with something unspoken. "I don't usually do this," she said quietly. "Neither do I." As the elevator doors closed, he reached out and touched her wrist gently where the bandage had been. "You're healing," he said. She met his eyes. "So are you." Back in the car, Natalie leaned her head against the window. The city blurred past again, but this time it didn't feel cold or distant. Something had shifted. Something real, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running anymore. Natalie walked through the glass doors of the atrium, her breath catching as a warm rush of air swept over her. The gallery buzzed with subtle music and murmured conversation, the lighting soft and golden against walls lined with modern paintings. She hadn't expected this, not the silent auction. Not the valet. Not the feeling of being utterly out of place in a room full of people who looked like they belonged on magazine covers or behind podiums. She adjusted the sleeve of her navy dress, the one Camille had found for her at a consignment shop the day before, insisting it was quietly powerful. Natalie had argued. Camille had won. A server passed by offering champagne. She declined, fingers tightening on the strap of her clutch. Then she saw him. Marcus stood at the far end of the gallery, speaking to a woman in a silver gown. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tension in the set of his jaw, the way he shifted his weight slightly before turning his head as if sensing her gaze. When his eyes found hers, the noise of the gallery dulled. He excused himself and made his way toward her, threading through the crowd like he'd done it 1,000 times before. The confidence wasn't forced, it was a part of him, like the quiet intensity in his gaze that never wavered once he reached her. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "You asked," she replied, lifting her chin. "And you were very specific." "I didn't think I'd have to be convincing again." "You weren't. I just didn't know this was going to be all this." "It's not usually," he said, glancing around. "Tonight's a fundraiser. I had to make an appearance." "I thought maybe you'd like to see what my world actually looks like. I'm not sure I belong in it. You're already here." He offered his arm, and after a breath, she took it. He guided her toward the back, where a smaller alcove housed a collection of photographs. The lighting shifted to a cooler hue, the noise fading behind them. "These are mine," he said. She blinked. "You took these?" He nodded. "Before all of this, I traveled. I thought I'd be a photojournalist." Natalie studied the images, a boy smiling in the rain in Mumbai. A cracked wall in Prague with ivy crawling through the fractures. A woman sleeping on a train in Tokyo, her face turned toward a window full of light. "They're beautiful," she said. "They reminded me what matters once." And now he was quiet for a moment. "Now I try not to forget." Natalie turned to him. "Why show me this?" "Because I want you to know the parts of me that don't make headlines." She shifted her weight. "You're not what I expected." He looked at her then. "Neither are you." Someone called his name from across the room. He didn't take his eyes off her. "You should go," she said softly. "I'd rather stay here. I'll be right here when you're done." He hesitated, then nodded once and stepped away. Natalie turned back to the photographs, but her mind was spinning. There was something about him tonight that felt different, frayed at the edges, like he was holding something back. When he returned 15 minutes later, the air between them had shifted. "Can I take you somewhere quiet?" he asked. She followed him through a back hallway, up a private staircase, and onto a rooftop garden laced with strings of soft white lights. The air was colder here, but the view made her forget everything for a moment. The skyline stretched endlessly, lit and endless. "No one else is up here," she said. "I come here when I need to remember I'm not the center of the world." She looked at him. "You don't act like someone who forgets that," he exhaled. "Lately, I've started to believe my own headlines." "And then you walked into my life with scraped hands and eyes that didn't flinch when I told you who I was. I didn't care who you were, I know. That's what scared me." Natalie felt something tighten in her chest. "Why?" "Because it meant I had nothing to hide behind." She took a step closer. "Then stop hiding." His jaw flexed, but his eyes didn't leave hers. "I've built everything I have to keep people out, but with you, I want to let you in." "Then do it." The silence stretched between them, taut and electric. "I haven't felt this afraid in years," he admitted. "Good," she whispered. "It means it's real." Marcus lifted a hand to her face, his fingers brushing lightly along her jaw. She didn't move. Then his mouth was on hers, slow, deliberate, like he was anchoring himself to something solid. She felt the world tilt, not from the kiss, but from what it meant. This wasn't a game. It wasn't a chase. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "There's going to be noise," he said. "People will talk. I can't promise this will be easy." She didn't hesitate. "I don't want easy," he exhaled a laugh. "Of course you don't." They stood there like that, wrapped in the hum of the city and the quiet certainty that something had begun. As they descended the stairs together, Natalie didn't feel like an outsider anymore. She felt like she'd just been handed the key to a door she hadn't known she'd been waiting her entire life to open. Natalie stepped into the apartment, dropping her keys into the ceramic dish by the door, and shut it quietly behind her. The city lights flickered through the high windows, casting soft reflections against the hardwood floor. She pulled off her boots, her body buzzing with the echo of Marcus's kiss still alive in her bloodstream. Her chest was tight, not with fear but anticipation. Camille glanced up from the couch, a blanket pulled over her lap, a half-read novel open beside her. "You look like someone rewrote your whole story." Natalie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. "It feels a little like that." Camille waited. "So, it wasn't just dinner," Natalie said. "He showed me something real, parts of himself that don't come wrapped in headlines or dollar signs." Camille closed the book. "You trust him?" Natalie nodded. "More than I expected to." Camille studied her a moment before nodding. "You've always known what you're doing, just don't lose that now." The next morning, Natalie stepped into the bookstore early, unlocking the door and flipping the sign to open. She needed the grounding of routine, the scent of old hardcovers, the soft shuffle of pages. But before she could reach the register, her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, eyebrows lifting at the message waiting on screen. "Come outside." She hesitated, glanced through the glass, and froze. Parked at the curb was a vintage navy blue convertible, gleaming beneath the winter sun. Marcus sat behind the wheel, sunglasses on, an easy tilt to his head that told her he knew exactly how ridiculous and charming this was. She stepped out onto the sidewalk, tugging her coat tighter against the cold. "You're early," she said, stopping beside the car. "I didn't sleep," he replied, "and I didn't want to wait. For what? To take you somewhere." "Where?" He reached over and opened the passenger door. "You'll see." Natalie hesitated for only a second before sliding into the seat. The leather was warm, the air smelled faintly of cedar and something citrusy. As the car pulled away from the curb, she glanced at him sideways. "You don't strike me as a man who drives himself anywhere." "I don't usually," he said, "but this felt like something I needed to do myself." The city fell away behind them, the buildings thinning into wide roads lined with bare trees and stone houses wrapped in ivy. She watched as the skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, the silence between them comfortable, steady. After nearly an hour, he pulled off onto a winding road that led to a long gravel driveway. At the end stood a sprawling white house with green shutters and a wraparound porch set against a frozen lake that glittered in the sunlight. Natalie turned to him. "Where are we?" "My mother's house," he said. "She passed away 2 years ago." "I haven't brought anyone here since." She stared at the house. "Why bring me?" "Because this is the only place in the world where I ever felt like myself, and I want you to know that version of me." He led her inside, the air still filled with the scent of pine and old wood. Everything felt preserved, yet lived in like someone had only stepped out for a moment. Family photos lined the hallway. Marcus as a boy, a woman with the same sharp eyes and gentle smile, a dog with one floppy ear leaning against Marcus's teenage legs. Natalie reached out and touched a frame. "She had your eyes. She never let me forget where I came from, even when the world started calling me important." They walked through the kitchen, past a breakfast nook full of sun, and out to the back porch. The lake stretched before them, still and mirror-like. Marcus leaned against the railing. "She used to sit right here with her tea and tell me that the only thing more dangerous than power is losing sight of what you love." Natalie looked at him. "And have you?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." She stepped closer, her hands resting beside his on the railing. "Why me? I've asked myself that every day since you fell in front of me," he said. "And the only answer that makes sense is that I didn't know how much I needed someone honest until I met you." She turned to face him. "And what exactly do you want from me, Marcus?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. "I want to stop chasing things that don't matter," he said. "I want to build something that does, with you." Her voice barely made it past her throat. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," he said, opening the box. Inside was a ring so simple it nearly brought her to tears. No massive stone, no flash, just a delicate gold band with a single diamond, understated and elegant. He lifted it toward her. "Say yes." Natalie laughed, breathless, a hand covering her mouth. "You're insane." "Entirely," he said. "But I'd rather be insane with you than sane without you." Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded slowly. "Then yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms, holding her like he never intended to let go. The cold wind rushed around them, but Natalie didn't feel it, not with his heartbeat pressed to hers. Later, they sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun sink low over the lake. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "What now?" she asked quietly. "We go home," he said. "And we make a life. In your penthouse, in whatever place you want to call home. I'll buy the bookstore if you want it. I'll build a new one if you don't. I just want you beside me." She looked up at him. "And if I say I want this house, I'll have it restored before spring." She laughed. "You're impossible. And you're the only reason I've ever wanted to change." Natalie closed her eyes, her fingers curling around his. She could feel the road that led here, the icy fall, the unexpected help, the slow unraveling of everything she thought she wanted. She hadn't planned for this. Not the man, not the love, not the future that was now unfolding like sunrise over frozen water. But as he kissed the top of her head and held her tighter, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she had fallen, and so had he. The first snow of February was falling in thick, lazy flakes when Marcus stepped through the door of Natalie's bookstore, shaking the cold from his coat. A small bell above the threshold gave a soft chime, and she looked up from behind the counter, her eyes catching his with the same quiet certainty they always held now. He stepped toward her, brushing the snow from his shoulders. "You closed early. I had a feeling you were coming." She slid out from behind the register, tucking a slip of paper into the pages of a half-read novel. "You've been avoiding your phone." "I needed a few hours without a dozen people trying to change my mind." She stopped in front of him. "About what?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "The London project. I told them no." Her brows rose, but she didn't flinch. "You've been working toward that for years." "They wanted me to move there, permanently. They offered equity, a private estate, the works, and you turned it down." "I'd rather build something real here." He looked around the shop. "Something that doesn't start over every time the skyline changes." She reached out, her fingers closing over his. "You're sure?" "I'm not walking away from you. Not for anything, not again." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded and drew him into the back room. A narrow staircase led to the apartment above, the one she'd taken over since her roommate moved in with her fiancé 2 weeks ago. It still smelled like cedar from the bundle she kept near the radiator, and the space was layered with warmth-soft rugs, crooked shelves, and a mug half full of peppermint tea on the windowsill. Marcus eased onto the couch, his long frame folding into the cushions like it had always belonged there. Natalie perched beside him, her knees tucked under her. "I didn't expect you to choose this," she said. "I didn't either, until I realized I was trying to impress people who didn't know me. And what now? Now I want a life where I'm not proving anything. Just living it with you." She tilted her head. "You mean that?" He reached into his pocket again and handed her a key. "I had the place on Orchard renovated. It's got a skylight in the bedroom and a kitchen with one of those ridiculous stoves you always stop and stare at in catalogs." Her voice caught. "You bought it." "I bought it for us. Not as a statement. Not as a performance. Just because I know what it's like to come home to silence, and I don't want that anymore. I want coffee cups left in the sink and your sweater on the back of a chair. I want late nights with books we never finish." She stared down at the key. "I don't want to lose myself in someone else's world." "You won't," he said. "We'll build one together." She set the key down slowly and leaned in, her hand on his chest. "You always sound so sure." "I'm not. But I'm willing to risk being wrong if it means waking up beside you." The next few weeks unfolded with quiet decisions and shared routines. Marcus turned the penthouse into a design studio for his photography, hiring a small team to manage his real estate business while he scaled back. Natalie expanded the bookstore to include a small cafe funded by an anonymous investor, though no one in the neighborhood needed to be told who it was. They didn't announce anything. No press releases, no social media posts, just a quiet shift in the way they moved through life side by side. On the first warm day of spring, Marcus led Natalie through a narrow trail in a public garden just outside the city. The trees were blooming in pale pinks and whites, and the air smelled like rain and new beginnings. "I used to come here with my mother," he said, guiding her to a wooden archway wrapped in wisteria. "She said when the blooms returned, it meant life was ready to begin again." Natalie traced her fingers along a petal. "It feels like something's shifted." He took her hands. "I want to marry you, Natalie." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "I don't need a ceremony with champagne towers or 500 guests," he said. "I just need you, and a promise that we'll keep choosing each other." She blinked fast. "Then let's do it." They married a month later in the garden beneath the archway. Camille stood beside Natalie, laughing through tears as she fluffed the veil that Marcus had commissioned from an independent designer in Milan. Only 20 guests were invited, close friends, a few family members from both sides, and a couple of regulars from the bookstore who had become like family. Marcus wore a navy suit with no tie, and Natalie's dress was simple, ivory, sleeveless, and soft as petals. There were no cameras, no media, no headlines, just the sound of birdsong and the breeze carrying their vows across the trees. After the ceremony, they danced barefoot beneath the wisteria. Marcus held her close, his hand steady at her spine, his eyes never leaving hers. "This is what I didn't know I was missing," he said. She smiled. "It's what I stopped believing existed." He kissed her gently. "You brought me back to myself, and you made me feel like I was always enough." Later, as the sun dipped low and lanterns flickered in the branches, they sat on a bench wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars appear one by one. "You know," she said, resting her head against his shoulder, "if I hadn't slipped on that sidewalk, you would have still found me," he said. "One way or another. I like to think the universe gave you a push. I like to think you gave me a reason to stop running." They fell into silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Around them, the garden settled into night, the air soft with promise. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future didn't feel like a question. It felt like a home.